Chapter 14. Late into the night, I sat in the massive leather chair behind Tobias Hawthorne's desk, staring at my birth certificate, at the signature the billionaire had highlighted. The name was my father's, but the handwriting was the same as the writing on the wall of Toby's wing. A distinct mix of print and cursive. Toby Hawthorne signed my birth certificate. I couldn't say those words out loud. All I could do was think about Ricky Graham's. By the age of 7, I'd been done letting him hurt me. But at 6, I thought he hung the moon. He would breeze into town, pick me up, swing me around. He'd call me his girl and tell me that he'd gotten me a present. I'd fish through his pocket, and whatever I found there, a pen, loose change, a restaurant mint, I got to keep. It took me years to realize that every piece of treasure he ever gave me was trash. My vision blurred, and I blinked back tears, staring at the signature. Ricky's name, but Toby's writing. I had a secret about the day you were born. I could hear my mother as clearly as if she were in the room with me. I have a secret. It was a game we had played my whole life. She was wonderful at guessing my secrets. I'd never guessed hers. Now it was right there in front of me, highlighted. Toby Hawthorne signed my birth certificate. It hurt to talk. It hurt to remember every game of chess I'd played with Harry. Rick Graham's hadn't picked up the phone when my mother died, but Toby, he'd show up within days. And if Toby was adopted, if he wasn't biologically a Hawthorne, then the DNA test that Zara and her husband had run meant nothing. It no longer ruled out the simplest solution to the question of why Tobias Hawthorne had left his fortune to a stranger. I wasn't a stranger. Why had Harry sought me out right after my mother's death? Why had a Texas billionaire visited the New England diner where my mother worked when I was 6 years old? Why had Tobias Hawthorne left me his fortune? Because his son is my father? Everything else, my birthday, my name, the entire puzzle, the Hawthorne brothers, I had thought we'd solved it. It was exactly what Jameson had called it down in the tunnel. Misdirection. I stood up, unable to stay in one place a moment longer. I hadn't needed a father in a very long time. I'd learned to expect nothing. I stopped letting it hurt, but now all I could think about was that, yes, Harry used to scowl when I outmaneuvered him on the chessboard, but his eyes had gleamed. He'd called me princess and horrible girl, and I'd called him old man. A jagged breath caught my throat. I walked forward towards the double doors that separated the office from its balcony. I burst through them, and they ricocheted back. Toby Hawthorne signed my birth certificate. My voice was rough in my throat, but I had to say the words out loud. I had to hear them to believe them. I gulped in the air, tried to take what I'd just said to its local conclusion, but I couldn't. The physical couldn't say the words. I couldn't even think them. Down below, I saw movement in the pool. Grayson, his arms cut through the water in a brutal, pushing breaststroke. Even from the distance, I could see the way his muscles pulled back his skin. No matter how long I watched him, his pace never changed. I wondered if he was swimming to get away from something, to silence the thoughts in his mind. I wondered how it was possible that watching him made breathing easier and harder at the same time. Finally, he pulled himself out of the pool as if guided by some kind of sixth sense, his head angled up towards me. I stared at him through the night, through the space between us. He looked away first. I was used to people walking away. I was good at not expecting anything from anyone. But as I retreated back inside the office, I found myself staring at my birth certificate again. I couldn't make this not matter. I couldn't make Toby, Harry, not matter. Even though he'd lied to me, even though he'd let me live in my car and buy him breakfast when he came from one of the richest families in the world. He's my father. The words came. Finally, brutally, I couldn't unthink them. Every sign pointed to the same conclusion. I forced myself to say it out loud. Toby Hawthorne is my father. Why didn't he tell me? Where is he now? I wanted answers. This wasn't just a mystery that needed solving, or another layer to a puzzle. It wasn't a game. Not to me. Not anymore. Chapter 15. We need to talk. Jameson found me hidden away in the archive, prep school for library. The next day, until now, he'd kept his distance within the walls of High's country day. Not that anyone but Eli was around to see us. I have to finish my calculus homework. I avoided looking directly at him. I needed space. I needed to think. It's E-Day. Jameson pulled up a seat next to me. You have plenty of free time. The module schedule system in High Country Day was complicated enough that I hadn't even memorized my own schedule. But Jameson apparently had. I'm busy, I insisted, annoyed at the way I always felt his presence, the way he wanted me. Jameson leaned back in his chair, balancing it on two legs, then let the front legs drop down and leaned to whisper directly in my ear, Toby Hawthorne is your father. Well, no shit, Sherlock. She's already come up with this conclusion a while ago, and now he's just getting on board. I followed Jameson. Eli, who couldn't possibly have heard Jameson whisper, followed me out of the main building, across the quad, down a stone path to the art center. Inside, Jameson strode past studio after studio until we ended up in what a sign informed me was the Black Box Theater, an enormous square room with the black walls, a black floor, a stage, lights built into a black ceiling. Jameson flipped a series of switches and the overhead lights turned on. Eli looked up, positioned by the door, and followed Jameson to the far side of the room. What I said in the archive, Jameson murmured. It was just a theory. The room was built for acoustics, built for voices to carry. Tell me I'm wrong. I glanced back at Eli and chose my words carefully in response. I found a hidden compartment in your grandfather's desk. Whoa, that was weird. There was a copy of my birth certificate. I didn't say Toby's name. I wouldn't, not with an audience. And, Jameson prompted, the name was my father's. I lowered my voice so much that Jameson had to step closer to hear it. The signature wasn't. I knew it. Jameson started pacing, but he turned back towards me before he got too far. Do you realize what this means, Eris? He asked, his green eyes alight. I did. I'd said it out loud once. It made sense. More sense than anything else had made sense. I arrived from the reading of the will. More sense than anything else had made since I arrived for the reading of the will. There could be other explanations, I said, hoarsely, even though I didn't really believe that. I have a secret. My mother hadn't invented that game out of nowhere. My whole life she'd been telling me there was something I didn't know. Something big. Something about me. It makes perfect sense. Hawthorne sense. Jameson couldn't contain himself. If I would have let him, he probably would have picked me up, twirled me around. 12 birds, one stone, Eris. Whatever happens 20 years ago, the old man intended to use you to pull his prodigal son back onto board now. I don't know why I can't speak tonight, but it's getting so good that I need to read it out loud. Doesn't seem like it worked, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. I was the biggest news story in the world. I had no idea where Toby was, but the same couldn't be said in reverse. If he is my father, then where is he? Why isn't he here? As if that thought had beckoned him towards me, Jameson came closer. Let's call off the bet, he said softly. I whipped my head up to look at him. I searched for the tell on his face, something to let me know what angle he was playing. This is big, Eris. If he'd been anyone else, his voice might have sounded gentle, but the Jameson Hawthorne I knew wasn't gentle. Big enough that neither of us needs extra motivation now. Neither of us is going to solve this alone. There was something undeniable about the way he said the word us, but I resisted the pull of it. I'm at the center of this. It would have been so easy to let myself get sucked back in, to let myself feel like we really were a team. You need me. That was what this was about. The gentle voice, us. And you don't need anyone? Jameson stepped forward, despite every warning screeching in the back of my brain. When he reached out to touch me, I didn't pull back. The past 12 hours had turned my entire world upside down. I needed something. It didn't have to mean anything. There didn't have to be feelings involved. Fine, I said, my voice rough in my throat. Let's call off the bet. I expected him to kiss me then, to take advantage of my moment of weakness, to push me back against the wall and wait for my head to angle up towards his, wait for a yes. He looked like he wanted to. I wanted to. But instead, Jameson took a step back and cocked his head to the side. How would you feel about getting some air? Damn. This is like a long-ass chapter. 2 minutes later, Jameson Hawthorne and I were on top of the art center. This time, Eli didn't get a chance to position himself in the doorway before Jameson locked him out. My bodyguard knocked on the door of the roof, then pounded. I'm fine, I yelled back, watching as Jameson walked over, standing on the very edge of the roof. The toe of his dress shoe hung over the edge. The wind picked up. Be careful, I said, even though he didn't know the meaning of the word. You know something funny, Eris? My grandfather always said that the Hawthorne men have 9 lives. Jameson turned back to me. Hawthorne men, he repeated, have 9 lives. He was talking about Toby. The old man knew his son had survived. He knew that Toby was out there, but he never did more than drop hints until he left the message for Xander. Find Tobias Hawthorne, the second, I said quietly. After holding my gaze for a moment longer, Jameson disappeared behind a nearby column and came back with what appeared to be a roll of astroturf and a bucket of golf balls. He set the bucket down, then rolled out the turf. He disappeared a second time, then came back with golf clubs and snatched a ball from the bucket. He laid the ball on the turf and lined up his shot. I came up here, he said, looking out of the picturesque woods on the backside of the campus, to get away. His feet shoulder-width apart, he swung the club back and then took his shot. The golf ball soared off the roof of the art center and into the woods. I'm not saying that I think you're overthinking, Eris. I'm not saying that I think you're hurting. I'm just saying. He held the golf club out to me. Sometimes it feels good to smack the hell out of something. I stared at him incredulously, then smiled. This has got to be against the rules. What rules? Jameson smirked. When I didn't move to take the club, he got another ball and lined up another shot. Allow me to let you in on a Hawthorne trade secret, Eris. There are no rules that matter more than winning. He paused just for a moment. I don't know who my father is. Sky was never what one would call maternal. The old man raised us. He made us in his own image. Jameson swung and the ball went soaring. Zan has his mind. Grayson got the gravitas. Nash has a savior complex. And I, another ball, another shot. I don't know what to give up. I don't know when to give up. Jameson turned back to me and held the club out once more. I remember Sky telling me that the word to describe Jameson was hungry. I took the club from his hand. My fingers brushed his. I'm the one who doesn't give up, Jameson reiterated. But Xander is the one the old man asked to find Toby. On the other side of the door to the roof, Eli was still banging. I should put him out of his misery. I looked at Jameson. I should walk away, but I didn't. This was the closest Jameson had come to opening up to me about what it was like growing up Hawthorne. I walked over to the bucket of golf balls and tossed one into the turf. I'd never held a golf club before. I had no idea what I was doing, but it looked satisfying. Sometimes it did feel good to smack the hell out of something. The first time I swung, I missed the ball. Head down, Jameson told me. He stepped up behind me and adjusted my grip. His arms wrapped around mine, guiding them from shoulder to fingertip. Even through my uniform blazer, I could feel the heat of his body. Try again, he murmured. This time, when I swung back, Jameson swung too. Our bodies moved in sync. I felt my shoulder rotate, felt him behind me, felt every inch of contact between us. The club connected with the ball. I watched it soar. A rush of emotion built up inside me, and this time I didn't push it down. Jameson had brought me up here to let go. If Toby's my father, I said louder than I meant to. Where has he been all my life? I turned to face Jameson, well aware that we were standing far too close. You know the way your grandfather's mind operated? I told him fiercely. You know, his go-to tricks. What are we missing? We. I said we. Toby died years before you were born. Jameson always looked at me like I had the answers, like I was the answer. It's been 20 years since the fire at Hawthorne Island. I felt my thoughts fall in sync with his. It had been 20 years since the fire, 20 years since Tobias Hawthorne had revised his will to disinherit his entire family. And just like that, I had an idea. In the last game we played, I told Jameson, my heart thumping, there were clues embedded in the old man's will. My pulse jumped, and it had nothing, almost nothing to do with the way he was still looking at me. But that wasn't the old man's only will. Jameson knew exactly what I was saying. He saw what I saw. The old man changed his middle name to Tattersall right after Tobias' supposed death. And right after that, he wrote a will disinheriting the family. I swallowed. You're always saying he has favorite tricks. What do you think the chances are that the old will is part of this puzzle? End of chapter 15.